Welcome to the program. This is going to be a little unusual. It's not been planned on purpose, but we have a really important topic. I'm going to kind of describe the topic, but then after everyone introduces themselves, we're going to talk about the topic because that in itself is relevant, and we couldn't, as of yet, agree on a title. But one of the things that's really vital to estate planning, it's not merely the transmission of wealth, which is what most estate plans focus on, but the impact of that wealth on those benefiting from it. Example, beneficiaries of trusts. If you pass on 100% of a client's wealth, if you're a wealth advisor and grow that X times over and pass it all on through creative trust and estate and tax planning, that's wonderful as a step. It's not enough because what is that wealth going to do to the people getting? Will they benefit? Will they appreciate it? Will they be grateful? And that's not just that the person doing the planning wants someone to appreciate what they do for their own sake. They'll be happier and better adjusted if they're grateful and appreciate it. The statistics in America generally as to knowledge of basic financial planning are appalling. And it's not a major topic in estate planning discussions, and it needs to be. So without further ado, Amanda, introduce yourself, tell everyone how brilliant and knowledgeable you are, and then we'll go to Tom and then Kristen.
My name is Amanda Copeland. I am a licensed professional counselor and a certified hostage negotiator. I also do a lot of consulting for trustees and estate planners around the ways that mental health influence or wealth influences mental health and the way that wealth hits people and families, not paper. And I also provide direct services to families and individuals struggling with addictions, eating disorders, schizophrenia, bipolar, and other kinds of mental health complexities.
I,
Kristen?
I I've heard you've written before we go to Kristen, I've heard you've written a lot of articles on these topics.
You're not wrong. I heard about a great estate attorney I write most of them with.
Okay. And you didn't tell anyone what John A. Warnick said was your most important credential.
My most important credential is that Marty Shenkman is my best friend.
Okay. Kristen, tell everybody who you are.
I'm Kristen Heaney. I'm the founder of a firm called the In3 Generations that does education for people from successful families. That includes inheritors. The majority of the people who come through our programs are inheritors, but we do some work with the leading generation too to help them be more mindful of all of this. I care about this work because sometimes I call myself a former inheritor now in recovery, unprepared inheritor now in recovery. Not because I'm struggling with addiction of any kind or I would have immediately called Amanda, but rather because just recovering from the state of having been completely unprepared for the inheritance that I received when my dad died while I was still in college. He was a business owner in the Detroit area. Um, the long story short is that my brother inherited the business and took over the leadership of the business, and that I got the assets outside of the family business, which included a family foundation and just some invested assets. But I was completely unprepared for that and thought that none of this had anything to do with me because I knew I wasn't going into the family business. And I got a surprise. Of course, my dad was, wanting to not raise me entitled, but he had a much shorter runway, sadly, than he expected to have. And so it's been interesting that much of the work that in the business that I have built is filling in some of the gaps that exist around not just education from the financial literacy standpoint, which Lord knows I needed, but also what I deem to be some of, honestly, the harder learnings, the harder challenges to sort out, which were qualitative in nature. How does this impact my relationship at that time with my current boyfriend? Spoiler alert, he's now my husband. How does that impact relationships with other family members and friends? I immediately went into the School of Social Work at the University of Michigan after graduating from college before I had even sorted out the notion of what it meant to have a trust with this many place digits in it, and encountered a lot of conversation around wealth inequality. And so philosophically, it had me all tied up because what was my role to play in all of this? And so had me upside down and no place to go really to navigate all of those complexities. So education, when I say I work in education, we're talking about so much more than asset allocation and, understanding the time value of money. it's almost like we can't get to that until we get to what's really on the minds of inheritors and future inheritors. And that is like, what does this mean for me and my life path and who I am? And once we get through that, then it's almost like their ears are open to be able to say, okay, now I get why I need to learn asset allocation, all of the financial literacy bits that they'll need to gain a little bit of financial skills in.
Tom?
I'm Tom Teets. I'm a partner at Shenkman Teets with Marty, and we work and craft the plans for the clients and the beneficiaries we're talking about here. So I'm hoping to learn something from Amanda and Kristen to help our clients as well.
So my experience has been that the human aspects of planning have always been downplayed in terms of importance. I remember so many times in the past sitting at a conference. Remember when conferences were in person, not on webinars? And when somebody would get up to talk about any of these topics, and addiction was probably never talked about because it's still sadly taboo. And it's way too important and way too common in mental health issues as well. But as soon as in the old days, somebody would take out like a newspaper and people in the audience would start reading newspapers. Now everyone's on their smartphone when someone's talking about religion or cultural issues or mental health issues. It's just, I'll get all excited when you talk about GST planning. But if we don't address as estate planners, and I mean the broad community, whether you're a wealth advisor, insurance consultant, estate planning attorney, a mental health consultant, a social worker, all the allied professions that are not involved enough in the estate planning process, if we don't address the impact of wealth on the next generation, we really haven't helped the client accomplish what most clients really want if they'll talk about it. A lot of clients don't want to talk about it because it's much easier to say, I don't want to pay tax. I want all the money going to my kids. That doesn't take much thought. Saying, my kid's a bit of a ne'er-do-well, they're really not motivated to work, or my kid has a gambling addiction. These are much tougher, but real issues to deal with. And Kristen, I want to make a couple comments on some points you made, but I want to start with a story to emphasize how important this is. And it just dawned on me while Kristen was talking. So many years ago, I remember where I was sitting in my old office when this occurred. One of the large trust companies that I had referred a client to because we needed an institutional trustees, unrelated to this program. I use institutional trustees on almost every trust, and that's not our topic, but I referred the client to an institutional trustee. They were named trustee, and I thought it was appropriate. And we did not do a silent trust. We're not going to really get into it, but the silent trust, you don't have to tell the beneficiaries anything. And there's pros and cons to that. One of the big cons is this very topic we're talking about. How do you prepare somebody if you don't tell them? I want to talk about the opposite end of the spectrum. So because it wasn't a silent trust, this very well-known, very large old line trust company believed it was their legal obligation to send a copy of the statement from the trust to every beneficiary, along with the trust document. Now, our trust documents tend to be long. I'm guessing this thing must have been 80 or 100 pages. And they sent a copy of the trust with a statement showing, I'm guessing it was $15 million in this particular trust, to the beneficiary. Not even a cover letter explaining, hey, here's what's going on. How about the first thing you do for the first communication for the first time as a trustee with a beneficiary is you write a letter. Hey, kid, or hey, beneficiary, because they may not be kids, you're a beneficiary of a trust. Here's a little bit of what that means to you. And why don't you arrange a time with Jane below, our trust officer or liaison, whatever the term or position is, to chat with us about what this means to you. None of that was done. This is a true story, and it emphasizes why this whole discussion is so important. So this kid was actually in college. The trustee sent a statement showing this massive amount of money. And even if you're one of the big shots, so 15 million sounds like peanuts, for most of America, it's a massive amount of money. to a college dorm.
Mm,
Did
Oh.
her roommates need to see this?
no.
Here was her reaction. And I know this because I got a panic phone call from the settlor. This trust was not a trust for the grandchild. She did not get a trust with $15 million in it. It was a spousal lifetime access trust to
Mm,
benefit the settlor's spouse. I don't remember if the husband or wife, this particular one, they were both,
mhm.
and all children, all grandchildren, all descendants. And the anticipation was they may need some or a lot of this money during their later years. And what was left was going to be GST exempt, asset protected, all the good stuff we estate planners love to talk about. I mean, what could be more exciting than GST exemption? I've taught Amanda about GST exemption. So at holiday parties, she hobnobs with people saying, "Oh, I know how to do a GST exemption." She's very popular. What did the college age granddaughter do when she got this? She saw a statement that showed $15 million, a trust document, which she had no idea what it meant or read.
Not
She
written in her language, right? So,
she is written in legalese. I'm
yeah.
guilty. She quit school and called her grandmother, or grandfather, I forget which, from some island in the Caribbean to say thank you so much for the money.
Oh
I'm
my,
enjoying my life in the Caribbean.
wow.
Like on that much time. Shame on the trustee for not starting with reasonable communications. But
Hmm.
you know what? Shame on me for not discussing with the client. Let's talk about all the kids that are beneficiaries, all the grandkids, all the other people, and how we should communicate with them. And the reality, to now be fair to me, because I just said shame on me, most clients don't want to deal with this. They don't want to pay for it because, oh my, it's more money. And it doesn't get addressed. Now, this example that I just gave you is true. I remember literally, I could describe to you where I was sitting when I got that phone call.
Mm,
Should never happen. I'm sure that even if it's a bit extreme, the consequences in so many cases, even if not that descriptive to talk about or that, out there to talk about, are problematic. We, as all the allied professions, need to talk about this more. That's the issue. Another quick comment from a religious perspective, part of the concept is stewardship. So if you want
mhm.
to approach this from a religious perspective, stewardship. It's not just getting the most money to the next generation, is what are they doing? What are we doing with that money? And there's so many ways to do and address this. It's not only, which is going to be our focus, educating heirs, and we're going to get to just that momentarily, but parents, grandparents, benefactors, whatever the relationship, we should be writing letters of instruction to our heirs. We should tell them how we feel, what we hope they will learn and do with the money, how they can use the money to make their lives better, not frivolous. So stewardship, and if it's a different faith that uses different language, the concept of stewardship is pretty universal. Very quick comment. I don't want to get sidetracked, but it seems like I can't do a program on anything without mentioning AI. AI is transforming as we speak dramatically everything that happens in the estate planning world. The two areas that I think will remain the purview of flesh and blood people are creativity, because AI is merely looking at existing stuff. It's not coming up with new ideas, as I understand it. Tom, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And the second thing is the human aspects of planning. AI can be very good at doing a lot of things. It's getting better and better by the minute, but it takes a human being to sit down with another human being and sort of get the feel of all these different factors and what to do about it. And every heir, every beneficiary, every kid, every settlor, grantor, client, everybody's a little different. It's very nuanced. So
Mhm.
I think those are the two areas that we will continue to excel and be valuable, but we have to change the conversations. Those estate planners that, oh yeah, we'll do a trust. Like there's a famous ad, I won't say who the vendor is. Do you need a will or a trust? Actually, you need a plan. And part of
Mhm.
that plan needs to be talking about next generation. So I've babbled enough. I think, Kristen, why don't you start talking about the topic a little more and some of the issues you see, and Tom and Amanda and I will comment.
Kristen, could I just jump in very quickly before you get
Please.
going? Because
Yeah.
I just thought of a good analogy for educating beneficiaries of another category of clients that many practitioners already put some thought into. Consider beneficiaries in this situation like lottery winners and athletes at a professional level. These are individuals that have not gotten a lot of education about finances because, unfortunately, our education system does not teach people in high school or in college much about finances unless you're going into that. And now they've received a significant amount of money. And you see articles about lottery winners who do the exact same thing that that beneficiary Marty was talking about. What's the first thing they say they do? They quit their job. They then go off and they buy multiple homes or they go to the Caribbean. Athletes, I think the percentage is something like 98% of athletes are bankrupt within several years of ending their professional career. Beneficiaries that are receiving these significant inheritances that have not gotten any education are in the same position that those lottery winners and athletes are.
I think that's a really great comparison. And I also recognize that my situation as a beneficiary is unusual with the clients that we're serving as next generation and future inheritors. There's often a much longer baton pass than what I had, or the experience that you shared, Marty, about this inheritor gets the trust information sent with no context to her dorm room. And to be able to all of a sudden you learn about it and access to it opens up on the same day is not typically the case. I think what's more likely the case is across a decade, there's kind of some mixed messages and cryptic, hard to understand information about what all of this means. Like you have a trust, but you can't really access it. And maybe we really care about stewardship, to your point about the values underneath of it, Marty. But really, there's no preparation offered. And so they have no idea how to make sense of it. And it's really the context, like what we're talking about that is the magic stuff of this, which, yes, Marty, a lot of times is seen as the soft skills, is really the essential part. And a lot of times, if we're going into metaphors, I often think of it as holes in the bucket. So all of the technical planners take care of the trust drafting, and it's tight. It is well planned in line with the client's intentions. And then you bring the financial team in, and they're taking care of the assets, they're growing them. All of the technical side is check, check, check. But you've got all kinds of holes in the bucket in the realm of context because when all of this lands, it's going to land without story. It's going to land without really having any idea if the family members, and I'll give a shout out to the James E. Hughes Foundation and Stacey Allred and Mary Duke and Jay Hughes who have been working hard to get this conversation out there about can your family members live in the plans that you've created? So you can have all of the technical planning perfectly tight, but if you don't have this context built and this preparation built, you have huge holes in the bucket that are likely to be spent sometimes in the Caribbean with overspending. But honestly, I feel like there are just as many challenges that are created from inheritors that are really well intentioned and wanting to do the right thing. And instead of blowing the money, they're so afraid and have no idea what to do with it that they're not maximizing the opportunities that are there to impact their lives, to impact the lives of the broader family or the community, because they're terrified to mess it up and they don't have enough confidence or competence to be able to interact with those funds in a way that actually is very much the intention of the grantor. And so I think you've got a sort of a bell curve of challenges on both sides where things are going badly wrong without that context.
How do we begin to teach and educate the next generation about what's coming? And this, by the way, just to be clear, whether somebody's worth billions of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's important. And I would even say for those doing estate plans for lower wealth clients, it's even more important. If
Yeah.
somebody inherits $20 million and blows a couple million doing something silly or buying a vacation home they don't need or probably shouldn't buy, it's not going to affect their life. If somebody inherits a couple $100,000 or less and they blow 20, 30, $40,000, that may be the difference in financial security, getting their first apartment, getting their down payment for their first home. It has even a greater ramification. One of the
Yeah.
challenges I feel, and if Amanda or Kristen, not Tom, can comment to this, the mindset of so many people, and just like that trite, ridiculous advertisement, and shame on the financial firm doing it. You need a will or a trust. No, you need a plan. But what that ad has done that's so dangerous, and all these online websites have done this. It's not about planning and all the soft topics like the ones we're talking about. It's about you need a document, now you're done. So if you get the will or trust, you can check off your list. I have an estate plan, I'm done, I don't have to think about it. And you haven't. What is it we can do to start educating as advisors, clients about communicating to next gen? How do we reach next gen? How do we communicate to them? How do we help them?
Well, I think you've identified one of the first hurdles in it to educate the grantor generation, the leading generation, of the value of speaking to the next generation, because there's so many fears around that. And a lot of times the
I'm
fears
going to
around,
die. I don't want to think about I'm dying.
yes, I mean, that's the first one. We talk about when I'm not here, you have to get comfortable with those kinds of conversations. But then I think there's a fear that if you share with your next generation family member that they are a beneficiary of a trust, or that they are a beneficiary of a trust that today's value has X, Y, or Z, that they will run off to the Caribbean, as you've described. But I think that the risk of that is quite low in comparison to the risks of not having that conversation, because they're worried that it's going to lead to entitlement. And many times they're giving some kind of messaging either directly, or their life is giving a certain kind of messaging that without context maybe has more likelihood of creating a sense of entitlement. And here's how that plays out. So say there's a beneficiary of a trust that has a value of roughly $5 million, but the family lives in a home that is worth $10 million and their lifestyle is quite high. A lot of times we're hearing from beneficiaries that if we know the value, they're badly overestimating what they're anticipating. So they've heard mom and dad say, yeah, after we die, you'll have a trust, but you don't need to know anything about it. And a lot of messaging around like, you won't have to worry. Well, like, what exactly does that mean? So they're not sure. Should I plan for my kids? If I've just had a baby, should I plan for my child's education? Are they going to do it? Do I need to make a retirement account, or is this trust going to cover from that? In a weird way, you're actually reinforcing poor financial planning in your next generation, because you're giving them this messaging around like, you've got this, but you don't need to worry about what's in it. Where it would be very helpful if you could get them in the mix, then they can incorporate that into their life planning and actually make sound financial decisions for themselves. And so the very thing that you're trying to avoid, you weirdly are reinforcing by keeping this hidden. And so it does need to start with the leading generation's education to help them understand and get comfortable with the realities of why this kind of conversation is important. And then when you can get in front of the beneficiary to begin to prepare them and educate them, it's honestly the easiest conversation to have, because it's almost like, and I don't want to be pejorative in saying this, but I think there's a skill in being able to sit down and explain this like you're explaining it to a 12-year-old. And I don't mean because beneficiaries are dumb, like I'm in that class of people. I've had beneficiaries who are, MBA, PhD, have all kinds of education, but really have never had the education around how do I think about my $1 million trust and making goals for this money, and understanding, like, I have a training that's literally walks them through, if you have $1 million trust, how do you decide if taking $50,000 a year out is spending it down or growing it? And it seems like that would be a very easy math problem to do, but because it's very multi-layered and tied in with goals and a little bit of tangles around what this means, they do need to be walked through that to understand what's the role of beneficiary. How do you think about incorporating this money into your life plans, and really thinking about, are you thinking about this just in your life, or are there expectations of stewardship for you to be growing this across your lifetime so that you can offer the same thing to your kids? If they don't have a space, and I almost want to call it kind of like a neutral party, like someone safe to be able to have those conversations with, they don't always step in responsibly to those
Who can be that
conversations.
neutral party?
Honestly, I think it could be anyone on the advisor team who can show up with, I want to call it like it's EI, but honestly, it's humanity. One time I did a panel discussion with a bunch of rising generation family members, And one of them described it this way. She had had a big reveal meeting where they opened up information about her trust and her siblings' trust. And she found it so overwhelming. A lot of it, conversation was not in her language. And she said, if we had just had, of the 8 advisors who were around the table, if just one of them had come up to me after and said, wow, I imagine that was pretty overwhelming for you. If you have any questions after this and just want to talk to one person and kind of digest all of this, I'm here for you. She said, if just one person had done that, that would have been the difference between me walking away feeling equipped by this and me walking away feeling incredibly overwhelmed. And I think the net effect of a conversation like that actually reinforces you're unprepared, you're vulnerable, you have no idea what you're doing because it's not been tailored to you into how you needed to receive the conversation. And so I think any advisor on the team who can show up in that way can make a difference.
Let me emphasize a point you made and flip it to Amanda to talk about something. I think a lot of advisors may feel, because of some of the interactions we've had with the so-called silver spoon or trust fund baby, that a lot of these people are just self-entitled, spoiled, et cetera. And that's, there's certainly those out there, but a big part of that problem is caused by the lack of doing what you just described. But I think it's very common, and Amanda, I want you to make generic the example we just went through with a particular grandchild who is anxious to learn, wants to learn, but has already gotten herself into trouble because nobody really gave her this kind of knowledge or education. So I think it's important to understand as practitioners and people on the team, as Kristen said, anyone on the advisory team can play this role. And by the way, please coordinate. You don't want 3 different people reaching out at the same time with different
Good
messages.
point.
It should be one person, or if it's done as a team, that's fine too, but coordinated. Amanda, talk a little about this issue because I think it's important for advisors to understand a lot of beneficiaries, they don't want to be irresponsible. They want to understand.
Yeah, when I'm listening to Chris, I just keep thinking about my cousin Benny. And I just watched that movie. Everyone else is like decades ahead of me. But, I think about like, when you don't know who to call, you say,
Are
oh, I know
you
a lawyer,
are you
right?
going to
This
talk
guy,
about the
this
Ute?
guy's a good guy.
You're going to talk
And
about
so
the Ute?
So Vinny probably wasn't the best defense attorney to choose, but it was the only guy he knew. So ultimately if you don't put these people in place for your kids or the inheritors, they will find people who aren't necessarily the best people because everyone knows a guy. And so being intentional about that is really important because just because you don't talk to them about it doesn't mean they won't find a way on their own. So influencing that is important. The other thing Marty was talking about is, a lot of people either have guilt about money or being overwhelmed by it and feeling like if they express overwhelm, then it's like being ungrateful. But the way I explain it to parents all the time is like it's like if somebody said to you, okay, you know what, you're going to argue something in front of the Supreme Court, and you're like, but I'm not a lawyer. No one ever sent me to law school. And they're like, but here you go. We're betting everything on you. And we expect you to win this case. It's like a daunting and overwhelming feeling. And so it's not a question of intelligence, it's a question of preparedness. And when you give people an opportunity and you break it down in reasonable incremental steps, starting with the foundation of where they are, not where you are, then they could grow in that understanding and be equipped to argue in front of the Supreme Court. But that's years of preparation and understanding and foundation. And so a case that Marty and I are working on together. We got brought in because the financial advisor, or I got brought in because the financial advisor was seeing gambling websites on the statement. And there's a fear that this girl was gambling. And it's an interesting story because I get involved with her, and she does have a history of different types of mental health issues, eating disorders, then to self-harm, then to, there's rampant addiction in this family. And so when I finally get in front of her and talk to her, she says, I was given hundreds of thousands of dollars and everybody was grieving and I didn't know who to ask. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know if it would come across ungrateful. And then I told my friends, and then my friends knew I had all this money, and I like went around and started, living these high life things that I never got to live. No one trusted me with more than $20 before. And now suddenly I have hundreds of thousands that I just had access to overnight. And so I started paying for trips with me and my friend who knew about this money. And they also never had more than $20 to manage. And then suddenly I didn't really have the access in my bank account, but then I realized if I connected gambling accounts to this other account, I could funnel money through. And so then it looked like she was this massive gambler, but she also didn't know how to cut off her friends, and the transparency around it was really making her anxious when people said, "Why are you spending your money that way?" So she wanted to have privacy in her spending habits by funneling money through the gambling website. And when I explained to her that that's setting off a lot of red flags, that, going to hotels in New York looks a lot different than, thousands of dollars going through gambling websites. And then she was like, "Oh, I see your point. I just want privacy though." And I understand that too. And so, we're working out budgeting and financial literacy. And, she's like, if I were me, or if I was looking at me, I would say her feet need to touch some grass right now. And she just had such shame around what it looked like in her spending, and the fact that she felt like everyone was judging her, that no one would understand her position, but also no one helped her. And she really wanted to learn how to budget and what to do and what she actually needed. But, it's like now she's really juggling the fact that she told all these other friends and they have these expectations. And like, she's also getting used to living above a certain lifestyle that she had before. And now where does the balance come in? And how am I going to lose these friends if now I stop paying for them after doing it? So there's so much complexity. And like, a lot of people say, well, those aren't your real friends. Well, one, they were friends with her before she had all this money. Two, now there's this pressure, spoken or unspoken, in her heart. And three, most of the time it's better to have someone than no one, even if those people are users, even if those people are negative influences. Nobody wants to be alone. So, I just referred somebody to Kristen who is experiencing some similar things. And there's a lot to navigate. Having a peer group navigating the same thing is also a really critical component, I think, of what Kristen's offering here, so that you're not alone and you're with other people who have similar dilemmas and can talk about it and navigate it in a way where maybe you do preserve some of the friendships, but maybe you don't. But now you have new friendships that can emerge too.
Can I ask you a question that you and Christian maybe can answer or speak to? So, had this particular person, this is not an uncommon scenario, so these are the kind of issues that come up. Had somebody sat her down and explained, listen, you're going to be getting an inheritance. You need to understand that if you start talking to friends and people outside of the family who don't have similar wealth about it, you're going to change people's expectations. You may feel guilty that if they're friends, why aren't you treating them? If somebody had addressed some of those thoughts ahead of time, do you feel that, and I don't mean to speak to a specific person, but more generically, that would have helped her not go down the path of treating all her friends and now creating this expectation that she has, maybe unlimited money to treat them forever?
Do you want to answer first, Kristen, then I'll answer?
You go ahead.
Okay. I think data says for everything that the more you practice prepare and inoculate someone against these outside threats, the easier they are to navigate, and the more someone will actually follow through on the preparation. Kristen and I just were talking with you, Marty, before this about how beneficiaries and inheritors are very vulnerable to cults because there's so much guilt and shame about the money. People say, oh, that's evil money, or you need to, cleanse it by doing good things with it, or don't you want to save the world or change the world? Or, they're really infiltrating philanthropy circles, they're infiltrating entrepreneurship, wellness spiritual retreats, all this kind of stuff. And, when you are struggling with purpose because there's no necessity to work, it's like you're told you get to live your dreams or have a bigger purpose or do these things. There's a lot of pressure in doing that, and um, a lot of people fall victim to these promises. Like everybody really is susceptible to a cult if they hit on the right vulnerability and the right dreams in your heart and the right values that you have. And then suddenly you're just in this trap, and preparing people for the things that they're going to face, the shame that they might face, and normalizing some of these things and saying, you might have relationships and you might want to tell all your friends, like, hey, I just won the lottery. Oh, hey, what, like, hey, dinner's on me tonight. We're going at shots for everyone, but when do the shots turn into apartments for everyone? When do the apartments for everyone start to turn into vacations for everyone? And what are some limits that you can think about in advance? And maybe you pay for a dinner, but not every dinner. Maybe you rotate with your friends, or, like the way I explain it to a lot of my clients is there's steakhouse friends and there's coffee house friends. Sometimes going to the steakhouse with the coffee house friends makes it uncomfortable for everyone. And it puts people on the spot, or, like sometimes going to the coffee house where everyone buys their own coffee, it kind of takes away the awkward conversation of, who's paying for this. And knowing that there are spaces and places where you can hang out with certain people, but not others, and that's okay. Relationships aren't based on where you spend time. That's more of an interest thing. But, it's okay to not feel indebted to people because you owe them nothing. In your relationship, to know that your relationship is based on more than what you have is the gift we all want in a relationship.
And having this makes me think of what you shared about athletes. I think having the heads up that some of that this blessing of inheritance creates some vulnerabilities for you, and educating about that maybe is the first thing that you do. Again, this is why it seems so absurd when we go right into, I don't know, talking about compounding. I mean, that's an important conversation too, but it seems absurd because maybe the first thing that we should be teaching them is there's some vulnerabilities that this creates for you that you might not be seeing. And I think if we had some process by which, and Marty, I don't want the shame on your shoulders. I feel like the whole industry carries the shame of having responsibility for the fact that there's no standard procedure for this, that when there's support being offered to people who have acquired vulnerabilities along with large assets that they've inherited or acquired through in a lottery win or a big contract. And when we don't tell them that, why are we surprised when they fall victim to some of the very common pitfalls? And I would say, far and away, that topic of how do you manage significant other relationships and friendships in the context of wealth is the most I don't know, excited, the topic that rising generation family members are excited to talk about because it's the most felt need, the day-to-day challenge that they're experiencing. And literally, I'm looking at this family gifting policy that my own family talked about at dinner last night. Now you guys realize I'm in a public forum talking about having received an inheritance, right? So maybe we receive more interest from family members, friends, or whatever, of saying, hey, I could really use some help. But just this week, twice this has happened. And so it prompted my husband and I to say, like, let's, instead of just handling these one-off, like it might be helpful to be able to have a conversation with our young adult kids together as a family, because this is a challenge that they're going to encounter in time as well. And so being able to have the critical thinking skills to anticipate some of those vulnerabilities that you acquire along with a large inheritance is really equipping them. And my dramatic metaphor for your having to speak in front of the Supreme Court, Amanda, is that, as an inheritor, if you're passing along wealth to your kids are going to need to be Olympic swimmers. Like there's a lot of responsibility in a world where a lot of people don't have $400 in savings. If you're passing along to your kids even 6 digits of inheritance, they're going to need to be strong swimmers. But oftentimes we're afraid to let them out of the shallow end with their swimmies. And we think that something's magically going to happen upon our death or upon the moment when they can have access to distributions that they're going to know how to swim. And it's just very unrealistic to assume that that will be the case.
Something's going to happen when they pass, and
Yeah.
it's not going to be going from the swimmies to the Olympic.
No. Right. With no support or
No.
education. Yeah.
So One way that I think that we can engage our clients and practitioners as well, the old adage of the barefoot cobbler's children, you need to
Mhm.
consider for yourself in this situation as well. And two words I want to mention, perspective and experience. This discussion of talking with your friends about this inheritance you've just received. How many people have made that mistake? Practitioners read these articles about, let me give an example. MC Hammer in the 1990s. He made hundreds of millions of dollars in his career, but he always had an entourage around him. By the time that the party ended, they had taken all the money from him. We have those experiences because we've read the articles. Self-made clients that have made their own money, oftentimes they were in their past when they just started doing this, they may have made the same mistake and they learn not to do it. But because that's a lesson that they've received themselves many years ago, it's not even at the front of their mind that that could be a problem for their beneficiaries because they know it. It's intrinsic in what they're doing. So we as practitioners need to take a step back and realize these beneficiaries don't have the same pool of knowledge that I do and explain to your clients, look, you've made this yourself. You know the pitfalls, but have you communicated that? Have you given those lessons? These stories, the story that Marty gave about the beneficiary that quit college and was off in the Caribbean. Those are the kinds of stories that if you tell them to your beneficiaries, they will stick. Talk about the time that you felt uncomfortable paying for a friend soon after you started your business and got a payday. Those kinds of things, the personal touch from the client to the beneficiary, will not just help learn the lesson, it's a little less sterile. It's great coming from a institution, from a bank that's teaching about financial acumen. But if you have that personal touch, those family stories, they will help the beneficiaries, I feel, in a greater way. Kristen, Amanda, thoughts on that?
I think there should be a children's book called The Girl Who Inherited It All. And it should be it should be about this girl who's prepared across her lifetime for the millions of dollars she's about to receive.
I like it, Amanda. Get to writing. I think it's
It
important.
was an
And it
idea from
really,
them, actually.
but what you're making me think is that I get the question a lot from parents like, well, when is the right time to start preparing my kids and start talking to them about it? Like, whatever age they are now, it was yesterday, because
Yes.
we have a financial parenting education program that really does start. We have sort of like an age-based approach to this, and it really does start talking about how teaching delayed gratification at 2 years old when they're in the mind stage actually is a stewardship value that you're teaching that is important for everyone to teach their kids, of course, to be productive members of society. But it's more important if you know you're going to pass along wealth to your kids for them to learn those age-based values going through childhood. And it doesn't mean that you're talking about you have a trust to a 6-year-old, but it does mean that you can start teaching gratitude and generosity and all of those pieces. You know that they're going to have implication in larger ways later. And so I think it's a larger investment for people who are going to pass along wealth. The problem is people who have resources are often pulled away from the standpoint of time and focus to whatever business it is that they're building and growing. So it's a
Let me
challenge, but it's important.
two comments. What Kristen just said is to me so critically important, and it's not part of the typical conversations. If you want your descendants to be happy, teach them gratitude. It's not, they're not going to be happy because they got an extra 100,000 or extra million or an extra 10 million. They're going to be happy when they're grateful for what they have. They're going to be happy when they're grateful for what they have. Quick story. The first really wealthy client that I had 40 years ago, his first name was Henry, special human being. First, I was so excited to get a really large client and as a prospect. And I went to make like a pitch to him and I reviewed all of his stuff and went to explain to him. And I was very excited that I found major mistakes, really significant mistakes that a large New York City law firm had made on his planning. And when I finished all that, he seemed reasonably happy. And I thought, it was reasonably confident that he would hire me. But then I said to him, there was one last personal matter, and I wasn't quite sure, but you mentioned that you were a devout Catholic, and I wanted to let you know that your living will violates Catholic religious doctrine. And I remember this 40 years ago. He smacked his hand on on the desk he was sitting behind and said, "I've lived my whole life as a good Catholic. I'm going to die as a good Catholic. You're hired." So it's these personal aspects, gratitude, grace. These concepts don't get talked about enough, right? You know, we
Mhm.
can talk about G words like GST. We should talk about G words like gratitude and grace. We've all been to Sesame Street. We know the letter G. It doesn't get infused into the conversations, and it's important. I have two questions. They're really statements of things I've observed on a regular basis. The first one, I think, Kristen, this is kind of more for you, and then I'll give the second one for everyone else. One of the things that I see, and these are common themes, not uncommon, they're common. I will see parents of some level of wealth, and it can be a wide range, but they have children that they have made dependent on them. They've never made the children launch financially, and the parents are supporting the children. But when you just do basic common sense math, the level of wealth the parents have, if they're in their 70s or 80s, is more than enough to sustain them till they die. But what's going to be left when they die is not enough to maintain in perpetuity the money they're giving the kids each year. In other words, they're guaranteeing they've made their kids addicted and dependent on their wealth. They've not let them launch, they've not taught them responsibility, and those kids will hit a fiscal brick wall and
Mhm.
have to dramatically, not a little bit, dramatically reduce their lifestyles to survive on the inheritance they have. And one
Mhm.
of the things, and I've seen this so many times, it's not uncommon. I've
Mhm.
advised those parents the most important thing you can do is meet with your financial advisor and do financial forecasts. And almost every time I've said that, oh, we've done that. We're fine. I said, no, not about you, about your children. I'm
Mhm.
sure you're fine because you have X dollars. And, you know, I do my 4%, my simple 30-second financial plan, 4% times the net worth excluding all the toys, right? I take out the houses, the vacation homes, the boats, the planes. 4% times that, can you live on that? And if they laugh at me, I know they got a problem. But this is
Mhm.
not the standard plan for the parents. It's project having the financial wealth advisor project forward for the next generation. And they will hit a brick wall. I've seen this so many times, and people get very angry and resistant when I suggest that there's a major issue they're leaving for their children. Can you speak to that, just that whole concept?
Yeah, like I feel like it's riled me up a little bit because I think this is a big issue, especially since COVID, when, the stats are saying there's so many, especially 20 somethings who, given inflation and kind of how life has changed since COVID, are not able to really sustain their own lives. They're not able to live in a financially independent way. And so that's great that mom and dad are helping, but mom and dad are also really reluctant to share the details of their estate plan or how much money they actually have. And so the kids, it's kind of misleading to them, right? So the kids could easily assume that this will continue on. And so it's very difficult. You're almost encouraging a lack of good financial planning in
Yes.
their minds because of the lack of transparency that you have. And so I think there's a theory and a practice to this. I think the theory is to think about lifestyle. And I've also seen weirdly in the midst of significant inflation, weirdly lifestyle is inflating, and that's an interesting problem to have kind of as a society. But that is a hard thing for families to have a conversation about. I think many people in life, myself included, lifestyle just tend there's a creep to this. And sometimes the kids will be expected to live life alongside of their parents. The kids move back to town after college. And of course, you're going to live on this side of the tracks with us. And of course, you're going to come to these restaurants with us. And sometimes we're going to, be covering those expenses. Of course, we're going to go to these types of places on vacation. We're paying for that. But you've really expanded your kid's lifestyle to meet yours, but you don't have the financial sustainability to be able to make that a reality forever, which is very difficult to then go back down on the lifestyle creep slide for them. And I think that what you're saying is really important in the danger zone is the post-college years. And I think one of the antidotes to that is to help your kids figure out how to live in a way that's financially independent. I know that it feels good to be paying for a lot of things for your kids and it's fun and whatever, but it's not helping them. And I think families could do a much better job of equipping their kids to manage their own financial, even if it's you're still supporting them, you're still giving, I don't know, you're gifting them every year a certain amount of money, but then they're paying for their own financial life so that they understand how much things cost and they're developing some of that financial capability.
It's got to be sustainable, or you're addicting the child to a level of wealth that is not going to be sustainable. It will be much better for the child to be comfortable and happy with a lower level of lifestyle,
Yes.
and you can still treat them to a vacation or something now and then, but their lifestyle expenses are commensurate with what they can sustain, and ideally sustain without the inheritance. But even if it's sustaining with the inheritance, it needs to be sustainable. And we talk about GST planning, multi-generational planning, dynastic planning, all this stuff. Listen, if the money is going to be decimated and spent by the next generation, it's not dynastic planning. You can't
Mhm.
do dynastic planning just because you set up a fancy GST trust. You only can do dynastic planning if the money's and the wealth is going to last. And that requires not just the next gen being educated. And that's why I wanted to segue to this point. But a lot of times it's the parents, the benefactors, that are not being realistic, and they're causing real harm for the people they care about the most that they think they're helping. Oh, I'm making Junior's life easier. No, you're addicting Junior to a lifestyle that he's not going to be able to afford, or she's not going to be able to afford. They're going to run out of money and have a devastating last 20 or 30 years of their life. That's not love.
That's hard, Marty, for advisors to say to their clients. Would you agree with that? To give them that feedback?
I'm going to quote Fisher Investments. They say on their advertisement that they even tell clients things they need to hear that they may not want to hear.
Mhm.
That's the model for what we should all be doing.
Agreed.
You're not being an advisor. Oh, sure, Miss Jones. What a great idea. No, Miss Jones, you're destroying your family. It's the same kind of difficult conversation, and I do my same 30-second estate plan and then send them to a financial advisor or wealth advisor. I take 4% times whatever their spendable wealth is, their assets, not the toys and games and houses that you can't spend. That's part of the lifestyle. And if they laugh at me when I say, can you live on X dollars? I know they got a problem. But that's the
Mhm.
same kind of analysis that needs to be brought here. And a lot of clients are incredibly grateful when we point out that they're really cruising for a bruising, as we used to say. But some clients get very angry. They came to us because they're wealthy and they want an estate plan. The last thing in the world they could imagine or want to hear is, yes, you're wealthy, but you're burning through your money so quickly it's not going to be there. So it's not only next gen, it's also the current generation that needs to be realistic. And sometimes it's a combination of both. Sometimes it's one or the other. But these are the things that we need to explore to really do true dynastic or multi-generational planning. And really, if you want your heirs to be happy, I love the terms you keep using, Kristen: gratitude, appreciation. It's not about the raw dollars. It's about the perspective on it.
I want to add something, Marty, because I feel like, it's really important to also consider the psychology of the wealth holder. I mean, there's wealth builders and then there's the next generation wealth holders, right? That then pass it on and pass it on. And so I think also taking into consideration family dynamics, some people don't want to see their kids struggle and they forget it's your struggles that build your strength. Some parents are afraid of their kids, which always shocks me. Like, how are you afraid of your own child? But it happens, and they're afraid to tell their kids no. They're afraid their kids will backlash. If their kids are adult kids who might have their own children, they're the grandparents who might be the wealth holders at the time are afraid of the children withholding the grandchildren. I mean, there's so many threats and so many fears that hold the wealth holders hostage, that they also need somebody as an outside professional to consult with on, here are the things I fear. How do I navigate these fears in adequately preparing this next generation to hold the wealth and then pass it on as well?
I think we're getting near the end of our time. I think this has been a really important discussion. I encourage every advisor to think through these thoughts. I think this should be part and parcel of the conversations of planning by every advisor in every discipline with every client about these issues. It is not an easy conversation. Many clients, probably most clients, don't like tough conversations. They want to get a pat on the back. You're really rich and successful. How wonderful. We'll do a plan for you, and then you're on your way. This is the real stuff. Why don't we just go in reverse? Kristen, and then Tom, and then Amanda. Why don't you say any wrap up, summarization, final comments or thoughts? Kristen?
I think if any of this feels overwhelming, I think any place to start is the right place to start. And some of that begins with sitting down with the next generation and saying, what thoughts or questions do you have on your mind about, related to wealth and your own planning and your own focus on life and how resources are a part of that? Because sometimes there's assumptions that we make about what's most important to them. And then if we start with something that is not sort of like just in time learning for them and very relevant to what they are most interested in, it can be a mess. And so I think starting to open that conversation can be useful.
Building off of what Kristen just said, if we as practitioners feel overwhelmed by this topic, imagine how the beneficiaries are feeling when they first learn about this, when they're dealing with this. If you can put yourself in their perspective, you can start building some discussions to have with your clients to give the client understanding why this is important to do. You can help with some statistics. Maybe Marty brought up AI. Use AI to find statistics on beneficiaries that have failed. Compare them to lottery winners, to athletes. That can help your client understand why this is important and take it in a more positive and productive way for the beneficiaries and preparing them.
Here's my advice. I think every single person watching this webinar should call Kristen. And here's why I say that. Because it is really hard for advisors to also overcome their own psychology and fear. And how do I bring this to the table with my client? Will my client be mad at me? And I think Kristen being able to provide scripts for you to do that. I always say to people, when you normalize things, it makes it easier. And in the business of mental health, trying to normalize giving people resources for that, saying 1 in 5 people struggle with mental health, and it makes sense for us to prepare your family for the potential that you might need this, just like we prepare for statistical things like divorce, disability, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's the same thing. Everybody will be inheriting wealth. If you're thinking about how do we pass this on. And so you're preparing for the statistical probability of that and normalizing it by giving Kristen's name and number out in advance, and other people who might be like her, but just call her and say, how do I even start the conversation? Because if you want to be a good advisor, you want to stay around for generations, it means caring about the family above and beyond a dollar amount.
So I'm going to put everybody on the spot. And since this is being recorded, I'm hoping they can't possibly say no. I think what we need to do, just like all the mental health and addiction programs and things that you and I have done, Amanda, and we have a lot more in the hopper because it's critical, and we're trying to change the conversation and make it accepted, normal, and common to talk about those issues because they are so common. I think what we should do is create from this program a article to advisors explaining the advisory role and beyond just Kristen, the types of consultants and advisors and social workers and financial advice, things, the resources that advisors can use. And we should create a simpler, shorter article that we and all other advisors can send to their clients or give to their estate planning clients, encouraging them to start thinking along these lines. I think a simple article to break the ice is a great way, especially if the advisor feels uncomfortable or the client is not reacting well. You don't have to push it. Here's an article, just think about it, and we can address it later. So we're going to create, and I've now said it on a recording, so you're stuck, 2 articles, one that advisors can give to clients to help getting them to think about this, and then another one to help advisors who may not have dealt with this and aren't sure where to go to get them started as well. I think it's a really important topic. I want to thank Kristen and Tom and Amanda for joining me. And I know this was a soft, fuzzy topic. I hope you appreciate the importance of it and the diversity and the broad spectrum of topics that we try to bring you in all of our webinars. We will do exciting programs on GST and other planning, but we don't want to leave out the human aspects either. So thank you for joining us, and thank you all for participating, and good luck to everybody.